On today's episode of the Going Commando podcast, we are reviewing the 2025 offseason, talking about all the free agent acquisitions, all the re-signings, anybody that was let go. We're going to talk draft, all of our selections coming into the NFL. And we're also going to review a little bit of last year's playoff run and talk about some players we've met over the years. So stick around and let's get started. Welcome to Going Commando, a Washington Commanders podcast. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Going Commando podcast alongside my co-hosts Tom and Chris. It's me, Clark, and it has been a few months since you've heard our booming voices over your airwaves, as a lot has happened in between our last episode. Of course, the Commanders going on easily the most impressive playoff run of our lifetimes for this team, getting all the way to the NFC Championship. We have gone through a bulk of the offseason with free agency as well as the draft wrapping up last week. So we've got an entirely new roster to break down. We're going to talk about the playoff push. A lot to talk about today with my two co-hosts.
Yeah, Clark, excited to be back with you. Obviously, a lot has happened. We have some things to talk about, which some of them not being so good, some of them being very good for us. But ultimately, I think we're all very happy with where we're at this point in the season. Obviously, last year, was a bit of a surprise for all of us, and I think that this free agency and draft period has been kind of interesting to see how our team has been rebuilding itself. So just a lot to talk about all around. Happy to be back with you boys.
Yeah, happy to be back for sure, and a lot to talk about. Obviously, a lot of excitement there at the end of the season. Disappointment that we couldn't obviously make it all the way to the Super Bowl, but I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of good things that have already happened this offseason that I'm excited to talk about. I think first, why not take a look, as you mentioned, Clark, the free agency and the free agent class and some of the guys that we've been able to bring in, some of the movement that's happened on the roster here, and kind of just discuss that and then be able to get into the draft, of course, that just actually recently happened, not just a few days ago here, as well after that. But I think why not start over on the offensive side, right, in the quarterback room, largely looking the same. Obviously, Jaden Daniels, your unquestioned starter that will be in his sophomore season, is leading that room. We did bring back Marcus Mariota. Curious to hear y'all's thoughts on that. And then Josh Johnson was a notable addition as well. I think unexpected as well, and also technically a homecoming for him as well as Sam Hartman to wrap it up in terms of the class prior to any quarterbacks coming in via UDFAs and what have you. But do you all want to react to that as well, or do you think we should just go ahead and rattle off? I think any of the notable additions first and foremost.
Talking about the offensive additions, Chris, first and foremost, the biggest possible splash move had to have been Deebo Samuel, although there's another guy that might be a better overall player that we'll get to in a minute. But Deebo Samuel is the big name. All season in 2024, we were talking about how Terry McLaurin was kind of the only guy on the outside. Look at what Jaden Daniels is doing with this cast of characters. Zach Ertz, we brought back as well, had a quality season with us, one of his best seasons in a long time. And of course, he's back on another 1 year deal. But there was always the sense that Terry was kind of the lone guy. We saw some guys step up in some opportunities. Noah Brown, who we brought back as well, had some big moments before he got injured last season. Of course, De'Ami Brown was pivotal in the playoffs, but not any consistency from a number two guy. And they bring in Samuel, a guy that had familiarity with Adam Peters in San Francisco, only giving up a 5th-round pick to acquire his services. Now, he is, I believe, on a 1-year deal this season. But for a 5th-round pick, I feel like the risk is a lot less than the potential reward that could come with a Deebo Samuel. He's an all-pro, Pro Bowl type of playmaker. He's a guy that we can put in the backfield and run the ball with, get him the ball in space. You know, he could be a threat on offense, and he's an element that I'm really excited to see incorporated into the Cliff Kingsbury offense.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Clark, I mean, you think about, the year Deebo Samuel had last year, a lot of people were questioning whether or not, he still had it. And I think that a change of scenery for any player is a good restart to their career. And I think that this is a very young, exciting team. Although young might be a bit facetious given some of the other players that we have on the team this year. Um, but I think that Deebo Samuel is one of those guys who's going to take a lot of pressure off of Jaden and hopefully off of, an aging Zach Ertz who did a lot of heavy lifting on that offensive group as a pass catcher. I think that also he's going to help Terry McLaurin get open, and he's at the very least going to be one of those utility guys that Cliff Kingsbury might put in the backfield. You might see him playing slot even possibly, although we did draft a guy who we'll get to later who might be able to step into that slot role for us. But I think that this is a really interesting signing. It definitely seems like we're sort of pushing the chips towards the middle of the table and saying, listen, we want to win while Jaden's on a rookie deal and while we still have the cap room to sort of make these splashy big time moves. Obviously, I'm a little bit, given the year he had last year and just the sort of the nature of the NFL. I mean, NFL for a lot of players stands for not for long. Deebo sort of being an older guy coming in after having a rough year. I mean, anything could happen. He could look like a brand new player, or he could look like the guy that was out on the field at times last year who wasn't able to create much separation. But I think for us, especially with Cliff Kingsbury at the offensive coordinator, I mean, to have that sort of gadget player where you can put him anywhere on the field and sort of, even drop completely new schemes for him just to make it work. I think that that's a lot of interesting moving pieces. There's a lot of interesting moving pieces on this team for Cliff to work with, and he's certainly one of the bigger additions to talk about.
Yeah, certainly also a guy that's going to take pressure off of Terry McLaurin, which is I think is another key, part of what you get when you add playmakers to this offense. You actually open up the field for your best playmaker in Terry McLaurin, itself, right? So I think that's an underlying benefit of doing all this here. I think another obvious free agency addition in Laramie Tunsil, who's going to be holding down the left side on the left tackle side of the line now, in a trade with four some odd picks with the Texans. Surprising, honestly, a little bit that they let him go. And overall, I know there's some mixed opinions on what we gave up, for this, in this trade rather, but overall, I love it. I think it really solidifies and shores up the commitment to and is a piece of that really of the commitment to, protecting Jaden Daniels. You saw what he was able to do last year with a O line that I think, was above average overall, decent at times, had its flaws as well for sure. But when you take measures like this to improve upon that, it's a, I think it's going to be nothing but good things for Jaden Daniels and for the offense when you do that. And there's, again, them doing that, allows you to do things with different things with, Brandon Coleman, for example. So I really think that was a good move. Curious on y'all's thoughts there, and then we can kind of get into some of the other maybe smaller signings after that.
Yeah, I mean, Laramie Tunsil, this is a guy who's a 5-time Pro Bowler. He's one of those guys that seemed like he was just going to stay with Houston forever, sign sort of those long-term multi-million dollar deals and stay there. And to to have a guy of his caliber join this team, especially when we needed the offensive line help, like you said, we were above average at times, but we also were below average at times. I mean, you really saw that, with the Eagles NFC Championship game, especially, the way they were able to get to the quarterback and sort of disrupt the pocket. So he's going to be one of those guys who's a key addition to this team. Um, and he's going to really open things up for both Jaden and hopefully even the running game a bit here, with his ability to sort of pass protect and be one of those, big man movers on the line of scrimmage. Um, I think, we can talk about what we traded for him a little bit. I mean, a second round pick next year. I believe also a fourth round pick next year. We traded away a third and a seventh, I believe, as well in this past draft. So obviously a lot of draft capital going towards that move. But when you have a chance to get a top tier guy, one of those guys who's arguably top 5 in the position, definitely top 10 in the NFL right now, I think that any sort of investment into the offensive line with a quarterback like Jaden Daniels is going to be, key to our success in the future. So while there might be some qualms that I personally have with giving up all that draft capital, I think that there's a lot of upside and potential for upside with a signing like this.
I think what the addition of Laramie Tunsil provides is our first name on this offensive line in quite some time. Obviously Trent Williams is a future Hall of Famer. He was holding it down on the left side for many years before, he became disgruntled with the organization, which who wouldn't in that period of time. We had Brandon Scherf for quite a while. He made an all pro, some Pro Bowls here and there. He's been gone for a while as well. And we haven't really had a guy per se on this offensive line to hold it down. And that's what Laramie Tunsil is going to give us. He's going to give us a guy who's a known guy around the league. He's been a good player for a long time. He still has plenty of good years left in him. He was, playing at an all pro level last season, which again does beg the question as to why they were, the Texans were willing to get rid of the guy. But yeah, I'm excited because it shows the commitment to protecting Jane Daniels, like you said, and it also shows you that they weren't satisfied with the level of play from the offensive line last year. That's also evident with our first round selection, which of course we'll get into later. But looking at the rest of kind of the offensive free agent additions, the rest are more minor. There's a couple of depth guys, re-signing Trent Scott, of course, the famous first touchdown recipient of Jaden Daniels' career, but re-signing Zach Ertz and also re-signing Noah Brown and KJ Osborne to the receiving group, and in addition, bringing back Michael Gallup, a former Cowboy, of course, for many years, coming out of retirement to sign with the Commanders.
Yeah, and that's one of the more interesting signings that we had in the free agency. I mean, Michael Gallup was a guy who, we know some Cowboys fans, they weren't necessarily high on him. They thought that he was, certainly not an NFL caliber player by the time that he got to us. And we didn't really get to see much out of him. But I think that he'll be able to contribute at least a veteran presence in a locker room that is sort of not devoid of veteran presence, but a skill group that outside of Debo and Terry McLaurin, I mean, a lot of these guys are pretty young relatively. I think one other interesting piece to talk about, Clark, is the offensive line signings that we got. I mean, we bring back Michael Dieter as well at the center position, and we bring in Nate Herbig, a guard from the Steelers. I mean, it seems like we really just tried to solidify having depth at every position, making sure that we have guys who we believe in and trust, at least to some degree, to be able to go out there and play, on a down-to-down basis. Also, Foster Sarrell, who was interestingly one of those high-rated offensive lineman coming out of high school. He didn't necessarily play as well in college. He got his shot with the Chargers. He comes over to us now. So I think Foster Sarrell is a name that'll be interesting, especially given sort of the injuries that we've had along the offensive line. Samuel Cosme also hopefully coming back next year. So I think this is just a really interesting group overall offensively. Not too much change in the terms of bringing in new guys. But I think that what we felt was that we had a good core of players who understood the playbook, or at least who had a better chance of understanding the playbook than a free agent. And we stuck with our guns, and it got us pretty far last year. Um, but there's a level of risk in that too. Of is there some apathy that sets in? Do these guys are these guys going to be able to compete at the highest level, year after year? And it's going to be interesting to see if these re-signings contribute.
Yeah, Gallup is interesting. Gallup intrigues me just because of like the whole, retiring and coming back thing. So who knows what we'll get out of him? Obviously, I know I think I like Noah Brown being back here. KJ Osborne, as you mentioned, is back here. Really question mark, really about what you get with him. To be honest, still, I mentioned Josh Johnson. Obviously, they like what they get out of him versus guy like Jeff Driscoll or something like that. And again, we'll kind of see what his role may or may not be for this team. Another thing, just quickly to note. John Bates also got an extension, I believe, somewhat recently. So he's a guy that is going to be here for the next several years at least. I'm not totally sure on the details of that deal, but
Yeah, I
I
believe
did
it was a
see
3-year
a
deal.
3-year deal. Okay,
They
wow,
sent him to a 3-year deal, and he's making decent money from what I can recall. I believe it was somewhere in the range of like 7 million a year or something, like
wow,
7 million a year. So
that's
there's a lot
incredible.
more than meets the eye with John Bates.
Agreed, agreed.
There's
He's
maybe
very good
even
blocker.
a thought that he could, how many more years does Zach Ertz have? Is this a guy that could feasibly be a starting tight end in the NFL post Ertz?
That's interesting.
That's
Wow,
that's maybe something they're thinking with giving him a 3-year deal.
that's
And
really
let's
interesting.
let's let's also not forget that we have Ben Sinnott in that tight end room, a guy who we thought could possibly take over a bigger role in the offense as a rookie. He obviously didn't contribute that much, but he's another name, that's sort of affected by that John Bates signing. And how does that all play into his development as a commander as well?
True. I know, Tom. I know you're a big Ben Sinnott guy, or a big Ben Sinnott guy, however you say it. Not totally sure there, but I know you're high on him, and that's a great point. Be curious to see what we get out of him in year two. Right? Does he take a step forward, which I think we would all like to see. As much as I love Zach Ertz and would love for him to continue to be a part of this team if he can perform at the level he does and did for us last year. But you're right. At some point, the future of the team, you know, you know, can include Zach Ertz. There's only so many years left on the tire there, right? But I don't know. Let's transition to the defense. I'm gonna call out some names in terms of free agent additions or re-signings, and then let's just go over what stands out to you guys. In terms of on the defensive line, Cleveland Farrell brought back free agent Javon Kinlaw, definitely interesting one there. Dietrich Wise, another addition. Jacob Martin, an addition. These are some edge rushers. Um, some guys I am not sure. Vilami Fehoko Jr., not sure on him, or TJ Maguranayanga. I think that's our international pathways player. Um, Jalen Holmes brought back Eddie Goldman. Another signing. Sheldon Day brought back probably the most important signing of the entire offseason. Sheldon Day. Um, Bobby Wagner brought back. Nick Ballore brought back. Will Harris, safety Will Harris signed. Noah Igbenogany brought back. Corner Jonathan Jones signed as well. Um, what stands out to you guys, out of that group?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important guy that we brought back on the defensive side of the ball has to be Bobby Wagner. I mean, the consummate vet, the guy that sort of played the Jaden Daniels role on the defensive side of the ball. He's a guy who, people thought that he was, a little long in the tooth. Maybe he wasn't going to be able to contribute at the same level, and he really was, one of our more important defenders all of last year. He said I believe he set a franchise um, record for tackles, or at least maybe he set some sort of record for tackles at that point in the season. But he was a guy that we put a lot of trust into, and as a veteran, that's not a bad thing to do, especially of his caliber. So it's nice to see him come back, and he was obviously thinking about retiring, so that was something that was obviously on all of our minds, especially with the draft coming up not too short after he signed. Um, but he's going to be a guy that we're going to see a lot of on the field. I think maybe the most interesting signing of all of these is Jonathan Jones, the former cornerback from the Patriots. We signed him to a 1-year deal. He seemed to play somewhat well with the Patriots at times, maybe fell off a little bit in the recent moments. But Dan Quinn's a guy that is a defensive head coach, and it's something that's a bit cheesy to say at this point, but if we can find a way to make him fit into our defense, then it's going to be a high value signing for a 1-year guy.
A couple of notes on the defensive additions. First, I'm going to touch on the secondary and yeah, Tom, Jonathan Jones is a guy that started a lot in the NFL. Um, my analysis of this signing was simply that he can't be worse than St. Just was. So, hopeful that that's an upgrade. You're not expecting him to be a world beater. Another one that kind of has gone under the radar is the signing of Will Harris, safety from the Saints. This is a guy that has started a lot of football games in his career, played in a lot of football games. He spent his first 5 years of his career in Detroit, last year with the Saints. And losing Jeremy Chin is going to be tough. I mean, Jeremy Chin, a solid player, and by no means was he, this elite safety, but he brought a presence, in the run game. He was a great tackler. He had his moments, had the pick in the Lions game at the end. Um, but I think signing Will Harris could hopefully he could provide a level of consistency in that spot. And then we also brought back Noah Igbenogany as well for the secondary, who played his role well when his name was called, a former first round pick, and coming back for a second year. Again, by no means is this one of the elite guys, but I thought he was pretty solid for being a guy on a 1-year prove it deal, and he was able to earn another contract. But one other question I want to raise to you guys is your confidence level in this defensive line. For years and years, that was the hallmark of these teams was our D line. This is the first year we're going to be without Jonathan Allen for many years since 2017. He was the stalwart of that D line. He's gone. We cut him, save money. You bring in Kinlaw, a guy who was a first rounder, but has kind of largely been relatively disappointing in his career for the first rounder that he was. He's not necessarily bad, but certainly has not lived up to his expectations. And then Dorrance Armstrong's solid. Deron Payne, of course, is going to be Deron Payne, but that other edge spot, Cleveland Farrell, Dietrich Wise, I was kind of hoping we'd target an edge rusher in the draft, and that did not happen. And I'm not super confident with this group heading into the season. But what do you guys think?
I mean, we got Sheldon Day, so we're probably good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, bringing back Sheldon Day, uh, there's been a whole, ever since sort of we lost, David Bada. Like, I think Sheldon Day's done an excellent job in filling that role.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, but I mean, outside of that, Um, I mean, yeah, I'm just very curious to see what the actual defensive end is going to look like. Is that going to be Javon Kinlaw? Are they going to play him, on the edge, or is he going to play inside? Are you going to have Dietrich Wise on one side? Are you going to have Jacob Martin, rotating in, and you going to have Jalen Holmes rotating in? Like, what is that going to look like? Cleveland Farrell, like how much is he really going to be involved in this? He wasn't all that involved last year. So I'm very interested to see what this ends up looking like, right? Like, um, and I'm questioning whether or not we have enough bodies there for the edge, or for down the middle for that matter. I mean, we do have enough for down the middle because you have Deron Payne, Johnny Newton, Eddie Goldman, and Sheldon Day. I mean, so you have your four kind of like defensive tackle types, but I'm just, you have Dorrance Armstrong, right? So it'll be Dorrance and one of these other guys that I just mentioned on the other side of him, with a few of them rotating in. So yeah, do I love it? No. Do I think it'll be serviceable? Yeah. Do I think it's an upgrade? Do I think it's an upgrade over last year? Maybe, but that's because Allen barely played. So um, we'll see. Obviously, I think the linebacker room looks exactly the same, with despite the draft, outside of the draft edition. Um, and then the defensive back room, got better. Obviously you mentioned Jeremy Chin. That's somewhat of a hit, but I think Will Harris hopefully can fill that void, and I think our depth overall got better. Um, along with the draft. So, I like it. I think that we should mention special teams as well. But anything else you guys had before we kind of move on?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that there seemed to be a consistent theme, especially with the defensive line room. We obviously went for a lot of guys who were really good run stoppers. I think that's sort of a direct response to, that Eagles game and what we saw Saquon Barkley do. As well as, we had trouble stopping the rushing game all season. I mean, you think about what Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons was able to do to us in that one game, and sort of just thinking about the larger issues of the team. I mean, we really seem to be focused on stopping the run with a lot of our free agent signings. I think that if that's a position, if that is a part of our defense that we can get better at, especially in a division that has a bunch of new running backs, which has Saquon Barkley in it, and which seems to be moving towards, running the football as much, if not more, than passing the football at times. I think that that's a solid thing for us to upgrade. So I think, this movement towards the bringing the big guys in, maybe not focusing on the edges much as we should have or as much as we have in the past, is sort of a direct response to the amount of running which we've seen, sort of gash us at times in terms of defense. So I think that overall it's a really interesting move by our team. Too soon to tell whether we made the right moves or not, but I think that if we do end up getting stronger on run defense out of this, we end up putting ourselves in a better position to sort of win games on the defensive side of the football by stopping the rushing attack for other teams.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to wrap us out, on the free agency side, even today, as we record this, movement we did bring back Zane Gonzalez, our most recent kicker at the end of last year, who we all remember, maybe fondly, maybe not so fondly of, depending on when you look at it. Um, but we did re-sign him, and so I assume that was the guy, or maybe they were going to bring someone in to compete with him. But no, he was released today, and in tandem we signed Matt Gay, who I believe started his career out with the Rams, and had a good solid few years for them, and then was more recently on the Colts, I believe, and I think had a decent seasons for them. I think he had some misses in the long range last year, but outside of that, I think was perfect. So interesting to understand why he hit the market, but we snatched him right up. And I'm hopeful, with that reaction from this group gives me a little bit of confidence that hopefully, that was a pickup that they knew they had to jump on, because they really like what they saw. So again, hopefully this could be the solution to our kicking woes. But with that, I'll hand it back to you, Tom, to kind of talk about our draft.
Yeah, and this was a draft class for the Commanders, which I don't know if we were necessarily super excited for. I mean, we were definitely curious to see what happens with those first two picks. Obviously, we did not have our third or fifth round picks this year. There was a little bit of questions about whether we would use any sort of pieces to try and move up in the draft. I mean, they seemed to be pretty comfortable giving away pieces, to sort of address needs on this team with Debo Samuels and Laremy Tunsil. But this was a pretty, they seemed to stick with the picks that they had. We didn't move up or down at all, I don't believe. Um, and we ended up with five guys, and I think that it's an interesting five names. Obviously, you start with the first pick, which is Josh Connerly, an offensive lineman out of Oregon. He was a guy who seemed to be a Cliff Kingsbury favorite. Cliff Kingsbury left a note on Adam Peters' desk saying, "Take the offensive lineman from Oregon, thanks," and then wrote Cliff, signed his name Cliff under it. Second round, you have us taking Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. Obviously, some injury issues there. Had him fall outside of the first round, but he was a guy who seemed to be pretty universally praised as a second round pick for us. Seems like we might have hit on some value there. In the fourth round, you see us taking Jalen Lane, Virginia Tech guy. Obviously, not too far away from the Commanders, and a guy who is possibly going to step into a role here at the slot wide receiver position, as sort of, as we sort of hinted to, or as maybe I sort of hinted to earlier in this podcast. And then it's round 6 and 7, we went linebacker and running back. Kane Medrano, the sixth round pick out of UCLA. He's a linebacker who seemed to be pretty productive in his final year. And then finally, the seventh round pick, Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. He's a guy that Chris, I believe you were pretty high on when you sort of did some more digging into this. So I'm guessing, what's your overall reaction of this draft class, and then who are some guys that you would kind of target as those, people to watch for, especially when you get close to roster cuts and sort of the depth chart feeling its way out.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned kind of my first guy that I really like off the bat. I mean, Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt. And that's hard to say quickly, but yeah, I mean, I'm a running back guy. Like what I see out of him. I did a little bit of research. Interesting with some like eligibility issues. He only played in one game last year, but the season before that, I mean, he had a very solid year for New Mexico. He's out of Arizona last year, but again, like I said, only played 1 year. Played in New Mexico for several years before that, and I think Alabama State for a year before that. So he's been around the block, played a lot of football, and I think again we're always looking to get more dynamic in the backfield. So who knows? Maybe he plays a role for that RB3 spot, interesting to see out of him. I just like to anytime we can add to that room, I like it. Obviously, I think outside of that, I really just love I actually like the first round pick a lot. I love the commitment, like I said, to protecting Jaden Daniels. Hopefully he slots in. I hopefully Connerly is able to slot in at right tackle, and kind of solidify that again, freeing up, maybe a guy like Andrew Wiley, right, to come in, slide in at right guard, especially while you have Sam Cosmi out. So I just really like that. Big fan of a lot of what they've done there. But I don't want to. I want to hear what Clark has to say. I don't want to. You don't want to speak too much on the rest of these guys.
Yeah, so Connerly at the first round selection. My thought was that this guy, I really hope he does start right away, and I believe that he will. Uh, I believe he was previously a position player guy that just kept growing. And he's supposedly a very athletic player, which could be good on the right side alongside Laramie Tunsil. And then again, the rest they're going to have to kind of figure out. Obviously, Biotish is your center, but your two guard spots are of course, Cosme is out. You're going to slot Wiley into one of those. Are you going to slot Brandon Coleman into one of those guard spots? Is Nick Allegretti going to start again for us on one of those guard spots? That'll be interesting to see. But again, I think all it does is just make us deeper on the offensive line should Connerly be a hit, of course. Um, guys that we haven't mentioned yet, really, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Again, this guy might not necessarily start right away, and I think it's a good thing potentially. When we drafted Emmanuel Forbes a couple of years ago, he was a first round pick. There's automatically expectations on him. We could allow Trey Amos. He's a guy that has a little bit more size than than most 6'1", 190. And as a second round pick, I like this pick a lot. We need a good physical corner. Lattimore is projected to be a good player. He had some moments for us. He had some not so great moments for us. And then Jonathan Jones is a lot of times, from what I've read, more of an inside guy as well. So, drafting a big physical corner to play on the outside, I think could do our defense pretty well. And then I'll touch real quick on Jalen Lane as well. Um, I took this more of a guy who could potentially be maybe a Jamison Crowder replacement. Unfortunately, the OG was not re-signed this offseason. Lane is a
Pissed about
guy
that.
who, yeah, tough to see him go. He had honestly some good, like he
Bring him
played
back.
pretty well.
Come on.
Like
Do
honestly,
the right thing.
all things considered, let's do the right thing. Just give him a spot to compete in camp
Give him a
at
spot to
least.
be in camp and get him on the practice squad because you never know when you might need to call up your boy.
Yeah, Jameson Crowder, the OG, of course. But Lane, he's a guy that has a 4.34 40-yard dash time and just a really kind of quick, maybe gadget type of guy. Um, so I think that he's gonna be a returner, maybe primarily right away, but again, with Cliff Kingsbury's offense, could this be a guy that could be a sneaky weapon down the line? Who's to say?
Yeah, here's what I'll say. At first, I thought I was going to come into this being a bit more of a contrarian. Obviously, it seemed like it was a good draft. Now that I've looked at it a bit more, kind of looked into the guys a bit. I think that really started with the first round pick. I mean, Connerly was a guy who it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth, especially considering the guys that were left on the board. I mean, you had guys like Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, who ended up falling into the second round. You had obviously Jihad Campbell, who I was very hopeful for, a linebacker out of Alabama, who ended up getting to the Eagles. I believe there's also Nick Emenwari, the safety out of South Carolina, who I wasn't super high on just because it seemed like he was more of an athleticism than really a sort of knowledge level corner. Um, so I thought if you picked any of those guys that you were getting an A+ grade from me in terms of a first round pick. But if there's a solid consolation to any of that, it's that we drafted a guy who hopefully will be able to protect Jaden Daniels down the line and won't cost us too much money. Um, Connerly, obviously, he played a lot of good ball at Oregon. He seemed to play well against Abdul Carter, obviously the third overall pick to the New York Giants. Um, it's not the worst pick in the world, and I think that the biggest thing here was that there wasn't injury issues, which is kind of why you saw other offensive linemen in this draft get taken later on who might have been first round talents. But I wasn't super high on Connerly, obviously. I mean, it's hard to say that it's a bad pick when you protect, your franchise quarterback. And I don't think it was a bad pick in hindsight. I think that there was just better options on the board. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. And Clark, you hit it the nail on the head with Trey Amos. He's a guy that's not necessarily going to start right away, but he seems to be able to do that if we were to really ask him to. He had a great few seasons at Ole Miss, obviously an SEC corner. That scares me a little bit, obviously, given the Emmanuel Forbes sort of mention that you had early on. So I think that was something that was interesting, and I think that he's a guy that might be able to sort of contribute at least as a rotational guy in his first year. Hopefully, a little bit more as we get through the season, gets a little bit more comfortable with the system. Jalen Lane, I mean, Clark, you hit it once again. This guy is an athletic freak. He seems to be able to, he's 5'9", roughly 190 pounds, running a 4.34 40. I mean, he's an undersized guy. He's probably going to play in the slot a lot of times. at least in his first year. And I don't really see him moving outside of the slot, just given his height and given sort of, the the outside receivers in the modern NFL being bigger guys. I think you also see him play punt and kick return too, taking that away from Luke McCaffrey, who we saw at times obviously taking over that role at the punt return spot for Jamison Crowder. So I actually kind of like that pick from us. I think that he's a guy that has a lot of upside, and he has a lot of explosive athleticism. One of the picks that I really didn't like, although it's a sixth round pick, so what can you really say about it? Is Kane Medrano. I mean, he seemed to really only be a special teamer up until last year. He obviously had some decent production at UCLA in his last year that got him into sort of, being an NFL draft pick on day 3. But I felt like we have a really sort of solid linebacker room, and also the signing of Nick Ballore, a guy who's a veteran in the NFL. It just sort of didn't make sense to me why we took a linebacker in the 6th round. So that was part of why I had that sour taste in our mouth. And then, I wasn't high on this Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt kid out of Arizona until Chris started to sort of advocate for him. I took a deeper look into it. Obviously, a lot of questions given the fact that he wasn't really able to show too much in college, but a lot of people are saying that this was a great pick for us. And, he's an older guy. He's had a lot of college experience. Maybe that helps. Maybe that doesn't. But we're talking about a running back room where, I don't think any of us were necessarily too high on Brian Robinson coming out of last year. I don't think any of us were too crazy about Chris Rodriguez at this point in his career. I think Jeremy McNichols showed flashes at times in that running back room. So I think that, Krosky Merritt, should he show out in preseason and should he leave a good, sort of feeling with Cliff Kingsbury, might be a guy who could contribute on this team, in his first year as a 7th round pick. So there's a lot of upside potential in that 7th round draft pick. So, I won't say that I'm low on this draft at all. I think that we definitely had a lot of right answers. I think that there was some questionable things to it, but overall, I think it was a solid draft class, and we have a lot to look forward to out of these rookies as we get into, sort of next year and looking towards what this team actually looks like, both on the field and on paper.
So with that being said, that kind of puts a bow on our analysis of the offseason to date with free agency and the draft largely in the rearview mirror. We wanted to take a moment to just reflect a little bit about the season as a whole. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to you guys with too many episodes in the last few months, which of course a lot happened with this team. Since we last spoke, the team made the playoffs, won a playoff game for the first time since the 2005 season, advanced to the NFC Championship game for the first time in 33 years, ultimately losing to the Eagles in that game. But a couple of us had some boots on the ground for that game. Tom and I were in attendance for the NFC Championship game in Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field, and although it wasn't a great result, I think it's certainly a memory we'll have for a long time. There was a lot of Commanders faithful there, more than you'd think. I mean, you look at the game, you look in the crowd, it's a sea of green, but we met up with a large contingent of people at a tailgate prior to the game. There were support there, and it was an exciting time to be alive. We were coming off of, in my opinion, the best game ever in the history of our lives for this franchise, which was that Lions win. I'll never forget that game. Um, and despite the loss and despite sort of the jeers that Tom and I may have received, I don't think I'd change this season one bit. Jaden Daniels' rookie year.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of brought it up the good point there, Clark. Obviously, going into enemy territory, I think we were both a little bit nervous about what could happen. Philadelphia Eagles faithful, especially the people that showed up to that game, were a quite rowdy bunch. There was a good tailgate at the stadium, especially. There's a surprising amount of Commanders fans, as you mentioned, but one of the cool things was that we did get to go to a Commanders tailgate. I believe there was the Fox 5 news correspondent there who we were lucky enough to sort of meet up with, say hi to, maybe get a picture or two with. Um, it was a great experience, and I think it's something that I'll never forget in my life. I've told close friends and family members ever since then that I think the Eagles are now officially my least favorite team in the NFL. You
Agreed.
know,
Agreed.
it was a rough scene to watch in person. Obviously, speaking about the game, but overall, the experience was something that you talk about once in a lifetime moments, and there was a thought with me and Clark before the game of like, when are we going to ever be back in this position again? And it could easily be this year, but it also could easily not be this year. So we took a chance. We soaked it in. Me and Clark sort of walked around the Eagles tailgates, got our fair amount of FUs from fans, got a few other not so kind comments from Eagles fans, but we also met up with a lot of great people who were just, happy that we showed up, happy that we were, there to support our team. There's a lot of great NFL fans across the entire league, and I think that we saw both the good and the bad with it. And it's something which I'll always remember for a lifetime, and it was worth every dollar that I spent on that ticket, and every dollar that Clark spent on that ticket. I'm sure he would agree. Um, but speaking of pictures, I think there was an interesting moment that we were talking about pre-podcast that we wanted to get into, especially when we were talking about Jamison Crowder not being on the team earlier. A player who I was lucky enough to meet, I believe, in his second season with the Commanders. A guy that had done primarily punt return up to that. I had met him at a in a hotel restaurant, um, which was it was a weird whole situation, but it was awesome to meet him. He was a great guy. So I guess, kind of taking that leading into, what are some memorable photos with the Redskins slash Commanders players that you guys, sort of remember?
I got a couple anecdotes here. First off the bat, it's Sports Authority. It's a grand opening of a store. I want to say the year is roughly 2012. I think it's right after RG3's rookie year. Um, we walk in to a big line. There's a meet and greet opportunity with Chris Cooley. Of course, Chris Cooley, a guy that means a lot to me and Chris. He's a favorite player of ours for a long time. We named our dog after the guy. So got a picture with Chris Cooley when I was a kid, but years later, sort of a tip and trick that I learned from going to so many games at FedEx Field is where the players' lot is and where to go after the games to catch a glimpse of the guys walking back to their cars. And in the off chance some of them are nice enough to stop and take a picture or sign something for you. Um, so I've got one of those free giveaway things. Those sort of paper plastic things you open up, might say HTTR or Take Command or something on it. Got one of those signed by Chris Thompson at one point. But I do have two photos that come to mind that I was able to snag. One of which was Dustin Hopkins, the longtime kicker. Uh, there was some good, there was some bad, there was some ugly with him, but certainly a memorable Redskins kicker. And the other one, maybe a more forgotten guy, but a preseason legend for this team. Preseason legend, one of the greatest Redskins preseason players of all time. Got a picture with Mac Brown, the running back. So proud of that one.
Insane.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking about this, a little bit more as we were going through the podcast and talking about these guys, and two outside of Jameson Crowder, who was a lovely guy when I met him, he was kind enough to take a photo with me, and I mean, he's one of my favorite skins of all time for that, for that fact alone. But one skins legend who I was lucky enough to meet, obviously. When I say skins legend, I don't say that lightly, but I was able to meet Ryan Kerrigan when I started my high school football career. And he was kind enough to talk to me for about 30 to 45 minutes. I mean, a 14-year-old kid talking to him about sort of, what he was doing, to sort of, when he was doing high school football, and to give his time to sort of talk to someone like me who, I was a rather large fan at the time, but he was sort of wrapped up in the engagement that we met in it. I believe it was a silent auction. Um, so he's a guy that I'm very proud of. But the infamous photo, which was not with myself, but rather with my father, who was lucky enough to go to a number of sort of, Commander's meet and greets through his work, was that my father actually got a photo with Dwayne Haskins, obviously R.I.P. Dwayne Haskins. Um, One of those photos that I think, you look back on now, and it's one of those, it's almost a little bit scary, I guess, to some degree, but it's a cool thing because it was his rookie year, and obviously there was a lot of hope. I mean, a Maryland guy who through and through went to Bullis High School. I mean, originally had committed to the University of Maryland before going to Ohio State and coming out, as a redshirt sophomore. He's one of those guys that was kind enough to take a photo with my father, and I always, had a positive view on him, even through some of the more negative times in his NFL career with us. So I just want to give him a quick shout out. I mean, obviously, sort of a DMV legend to some degree, and a guy who I think, I for being so kind to my family, I just wanted to give him a shout out, obviously, and I think we're all a little bit sad to not have that guy playing good football or being able to play any football for that matter. That was kind of my little anecdotes that I had for this.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close this out. Clark, you are forgetting about there's another Redskins former Redskins player that we have a picture with. I don't recall exactly what ages we were, but we do have a picture with Jeff Bostic
That's
um,
right. That's
at
right.
rock bottom. When we were having dinner there with our parents one time. Um, so I think we were in high school for that.
I want to
Still,
say it was
but
either high school or maybe I was middle school. You were high school.
yeah,
I
potentially.
do distinctly remember I still have the photo. Of course, he had
Yeah,
his
me as
Super
well.
Bowl ring on him, and
Yeah,
we
he
got to
did.
hold it.
Yeah, so that was a very cool, underrated moment. In the I guess for this category, conversation category, right? Our dad also did get a selfie one time with Rex Grossman. So
Yes, he
that
did.
that's that's good, right? I guess some of my better ones or more notable players. I did go to a meet and greet for Santana Moss one time a couple years ago, just because it was very close to where I lived, and I thought, why the heck not? And so that was pretty cool. Didn't really get to talk to him all that much, but it was cool to meet him and get a picture and have him sign some things nonetheless. Um, and then actually, most recently of all, even just a couple weeks ago, I ran into London Fletcher on a golf course, which was really cool. Um, recognized him actually at the driving range before I played around. I was on a bachelor trip for a very close friend of, or not a bachelor trip. I was actually at a scratch that. I was at a wedding. I was at my good friend's wedding, and we were playing around at golf the day before the morning of the rehearsal dinner, the day before the wedding. And we were at the driving range, and just honestly recognized London Fletcher, and went over there, introduced myself after, confirming with Riley first, hey, my friend Riley, hey, would it be appropriate? Because this wasn't my club, would it be appropriate if I went and said hi? And he's like, as long as you're sure it's him. And I was 99.9% sure I recognized him. So yeah, he was super, super nice, offered to take a picture with me. Chatted very, very briefly for, a minute or so, right? But super nice guy. And so that was a funny one that just happened to me very recently as well. Redskins legend, absolutely. No doubt at all there.
Absolute legend, London Fletcher, a guy that has been a Pro Football Hall of Fame
Yeah, let's get him
finalist,
in
I
the
think,
Hall of
at this
Fame.
point.
Let's get him in
Yeah,
the Hall of
I
Fame.
think especially
It's about
after that
time.
moment,
True.
offering when I learned that he was the one that offered to take a photo with
He
you,
offered the photo. That is true.
that is when I think he earned his gold
Well,
jacket.
it's because I did.
So,
I said I love listening to you on the radio, so he knew I knew what was up. So
oh yeah,
um, again, super nice guy. I was playing a couple groups behind him on the course, so fun time, fun day for sure.
Well, we hope that everybody listening enjoyed some of these anecdotes of our interactions with, Redskins Commander players throughout the years. Hopefully, in a few episodes from now or a couple of years from now, we'll have some more stories to tell. And with that being said, I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Going Commando. Touched on a good amount of topics today, and we certainly will be getting back to you guys prior to the start of the NFL season at least a few times. So, my co hosts, Chris and Tom, my name is Clark. Thanks for listening to the Going Commando podcast. We'll catch you next time. HTTR and HTTC.